Hey, I've made a lot of Master Universe Origins customs over the past few years, and I tend to take a lot of them to shows with me. Put them on display, for example, parts I'm selling or full custom kits I have. And I was going through my inventory recently, and I pulled all of them out, and some need paint touch-ups. I thought I would just catalog them now before I go and work on some of them again, and I'd show everybody what all I've made, and I'll go over into the parts to use to make most of them. We'll start with my first one I ever did for Origins. I made Magnon from Galaxy Warriors. And I'll have to adjust the camera a bit because I don't have too much room here, so I'll have to do the future ones. I'll change the camera lens. So he was the first custom I did, and I did him early enough that Wave 2 hadn't even shipped yet. So he was my really first ever full custom I had made when I started casting resin parts. Before that, I was just making little parts and pieces for random things. Nothing really ever came together. This is the first one I did. So I obviously cast a vintage Magnon head. It's a bit loose, but early pieces tend to be more like that. And this was my first attempt at casting an armor. It's flexible, but it's not what I ended up going with in the end. As you can see, it doesn't close. I eventually had to make modified Galaxy Warrior and Fighter harnesses to fit Origins bodies because the actual Origins body is wider than the Galaxy Warrior body was. And as you can see, he has some paint damage to his loincloth that needs fixed up. And nowadays, I wouldn't have painted the loincloth red. I would have just swiped one from a Jitsu or a Clamp Champ. But at this point, I was literally working with Wave 1, so he is just a repainted He-Man top to bottom. I still have yet to get good weapons cast from Galaxy Warriors. He needs a weapon and a shield. But for right now, he's fine. And then I followed him up with the star of the show, obviously, the famous Galaxy Warrior, Baltard. He was mostly built in the Prince Adam bodies. As you can see, I didn't actually repaint the boots entirely, just the boot cuffs. But as of now, I would potentially use a Turtles of Grayskull Skeletor for the base body instead. It's not accurate, it's a bit too dark, but it is a nice kind of dull purple, which is what you'd want for Baltard. I actually have that set up for my Iguana and Devil customs that I've yet to finish, but they'll be using that body since the heads don't have to match. Similar, same harness. Nothing really to see. This is the first full body repaint I did. As you can see, he has got damage on his loincloth again and some rubbed off on his leg. But he's been rocking around for 3 years at different shows now, so we could use some touch-ups. The odd thing is, these two I had sprayed with a normal spray sealer I use for my resin heads, but it oddly feels tacky on the plastic Origins. But it didn't end up tacky on these two, and I don't know why that did that. I'm happy it didn't, but I've never been able to figure out how to replicate that. After them would be Eagle Man or E-Man or E-Eagle Man from Combo. But I've misplaced him somehow right now. Don't know how I did that, so he's not showing up. So the last of the knockoffs I have made full customs for is the Vampire from Underworld Warriors, which I got lucky when the Skeleton Warrior 2-pack shipped. I could do this. It was an odd experience painting glow-in-the-dark plastic. I really didn't like to do that, but they've yet to actually issue the skeleton body in anything but glow-in-the-dark plastic. Realistically, he should have different lower legs, the boots down, and a different waist piece, but I didn't feel like sculpting those. So I just did a straight repaint of that figure and the vampire head from the line I made a cast for. I actually have parts set aside for more of the Underworld Warriors, but I've yet to actually cast their heads because they tend to have big protruding things as you can see his nose, which are scary to make molds of. But he came up pretty well, and I'm pretty happy with him, and he's a fun thing to have on my table just because people don't expect him. Universe characters I've made customs for, not counting the repaints like the mini-comic Ram Man or Red Beast Man because they're just repaints or minor things, like I swapped out the Beast Man head with the one I had made. But the first kit I ever did was Queen Marlena, and I will actually say this is the old head sculpt. I updated and replaced the head sculpt of this fairly early on, but I never actually changed the head of the one I had in display because I figured I prefer the new one by a decent margin, but I'd rather people see the worst of my custom I can show them. So if they buy something from me, they would know they'd get something of that level or better. So I actually haven't updated it because I never get around to making enough extra heads to swap the head out in this one. And her lower arms have gotten a bit loose from just traveling all that time. But otherwise, I think it was a decent starting point. This was the first kit I ever did. First time I made anything but a head, so the lower arms and the torso, the belt and the head and the neck peg, and I guess the elbow pins were the first non-heads I did, and I think that came out fairly well. I've done multiple more since then, but I think she holds up okay. She'll probably get an official figure eventually thanks to the cartoon collection, but I'm still happy with that. The next one is also someone who might get an official figure eventually. I did an Mlectha, and I see he's got dust on him I have to clean off. But for right now, here he is. Now, so he is the head, upper arms, torso, and belt. And there's some things I would do better at this point because we frankly have options for more pieces. Frankly, he's too big for the cartoon collection. He has the standard origin style body. But, nowadays we could have more options. The funny thing is I used King Hiss boots for him. And at that point, King Hiss and Shawn Michaels were the only two figures with smooth boots in his bike style. And they both cost the same amount of money. They were both $20. Now, well, King Hiss has smaller boots. I'll use him. I wish I hadn't at this point. But otherwise, he has Mechanex's legs and the Masters of the WWE Universe Rowdy Roddy Piper waist because those blue plastics actually match entirely. So there's a nice secret for you if you ever need to build a custom quick that needs blue pants. But I think he's still pretty good. I like the head sculpt quite a lot for him. And I think he holds up fairly well, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets an official figure within a year. And then up next we have these two guys who I'm assuming are royal guards of some form. They appear in royal court scenes in one of the storybooks, and I will fully admit these two are not finished. They were just some guys who I threw together to fill out like army builder scenes. And so his waist piece should probably be purple as well, and this guy should have gray legs to match the armor and whatnot, but I've just never got around to finishing them. They're just kind of built with parts I had on hand, like he uses a Randor torso, and I'm not even sure whose legs he has right now. They're wrestling based, so we can have the overlay slide over the instead of the loincloth belt, but otherwise, I don't remember, and the arrowhead is just on a clamshank body with Fisto boots to kind of complete the look. Eventually I'll get them both finished up, cleaned up, and have them in a nice display, but they're just fun to have of some form of royal guys. I don't know what else to call them. And then the last one is the most recent one, and I made an Uncle Montork, and it was just an easy little kit to make with just the beard and glasses that went on an Orko figure. There was some blue paint on his hat that actually was just on the Orko I got that you have to clean off. So this was just a fun little thing to do. Very easy job. Just like it was such an easy thing to make with just 2 glue-on pieces. Customs done. It was just a fun little thing to have. And now with the cartoon collection, it sort of puts me off on making some of the characters I planned because they might actually get real toys now, which is a preferable thing because it saves me effort. I have another very non-finished custom. His paintwork is not very well done, but unfortunately I had to start working on the custom at, I believe, midnight the night before a show. So I had to just kind of ram him out as fast as I could. We did He-Soul from the member of the He-Force from the recent comic books, and I will fully admit sculpting his head was frustrating because we only have a few pictures of him. In wide shots, his hair is actually very different than the one sort of close semi-portrait shot that we have of him. So I mostly based it on the close portrait shot, the best I could. I'm not happy with the armor. The armor is just reusing one of the classics reused armor pieces that that Piper figure had in the Masters of the WWE Universe. And I'd like to use a proper battle armor body, and I do have some battle armor He-Man set aside for customs, but right now I can't find them, and I just had to do the best I could. So otherwise, I sculpted the head, and I sculpted the sword, and painting that M was a pain. This one is painted badly, that's why it's mine, and not one of the ones I had for sale. Trying to get the M recessed, the paint black in a yellow piece was not a fun thing to do, and otherwise he's just a repainted Clamp-Champ figure, just the repainted, as you can see the boots are painted awful, because I thought people are not going to look at the boots when he's up on display at a show, because the only thing people would be getting were the head and the sword. So he really needs a lot of work. The H is painted awful, but he was good enough to get the job done at the time. Next, I guess I will classify is the He-Man alikes. Some of them even predate He-Man. Actually, I think most of them do. But they have the similar vibe, and people like seeing them. The first one, I'm actually very proud of this custom, was my custom Arak, based on the Remco figure. I know he's a comic character, but I know him from the Remco figure. So I used a Jitsu body and had to repaint the one lower arm. And Jitsu is probably one of my favorite quote-unquote secret custom weapons, because a lot of people don't think about it, but he has a very unique skin tone compared to most of the line, and he's surprisingly versatile. Shows up for a lot of things. So have a vintage Arak head cast made, and then the knife and the axe, and then made the vinyl belt piece that there is a slit to put the knife through. I tend to not display him that way because he has 2 open hands, may as well. I could have made the vest version. I decided against it because that's not the one I have in my collection. I'd like to get a vintage one with the vest, but right now I don't have one, so I just defaulted to the belt. I sanded down the studs on the bracers to get the paintwork in there. I didn't have to do that. I mean, theoretically, you could have just painted the bracers with the spots, and it would have been a good enough visual match. But it was, it worked. He, once again, probably needs different boots, but they're just basic paints. I think I reused He-Man boots and repainted them. It doesn't really matter. As you can see, he has a couple paint chips on his legs now, or just scuffs. Those need cleaned up, but he's been going around for 2 years now, so he deserves it. He needs some work, but I'm still pretty happy with how he came out. Up next, we have 2 that premiered the time I did PowerCon. We have Black Star and Overlord, and I'm going to try to challenge to get 2 figures to stand at once. Their swords do glow in the dark, which was a fun challenge for me to make it work the first time. I will say I am still not 100% happy with Black Star because I don't have his scabbard working yet. I've actually modified his armor piece to have a slight cutout in the bottom where the scabbard will eventually connect, but it's been too much of a pain to make work. I just cannot get the mold to function correctly. That is a problem with resin casting. Some things aren't meant to be resin casted, but I still try to brute force it. Otherwise, he's built in the basic He-Man body, and I made a unique waist piece for him because he has such a unique belt. That is a challenge, and it's hard to explain to people how it works. And I've had a couple people break the hip joints on me, but I've replaced them. But otherwise, he's pretty simple, just being based on a He-Man. Now, Overlord is a problem. There is no figure in the line that matches his skin tone. Like I said, the Turtles of Grayskull Skeletor could probably work in a pinch, so he's too dark. So it is just a straight-up Sunman figure I had to repaint because he has the correct boot types that way. And you can just sand down Sunman gauntlets to make gloves because it's much easier to get Sunman-based figures than Hordax. And I think he is the only figure in line with gloves naturally. Well, King Hiss does, but he has ribbed arms, so you wouldn't want to use that. Otherwise, he's a unique head, which was a pain to cast, torso armor piece, which was a pain to cast with a cape attached. And then I'm very happy with my plan to make the belt a separate floating piece. It really pulls them together and doesn't make this torso look too big. But otherwise, I think it came out pretty well. I would definitely change up the armor some now. It's too thick. It's hard to put on a figure. I know it scared some people, so I like the bulk of the visual of it, but I'd make the interior part thinner, so it would slide on better. But I think he holds up pretty well. I am pretty pleased with how these 2 came out, and there's not a ton visually I would change, just probably production-wise I would change in terms of making the pieces for people. And then, also in this area, let's see, we have... I don't even know how to qualify him. I guess he would still count as a He-Man alike. We have Platino from Fuerza-T. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. I could be pronouncing it wrong. This would be a very easy custom for anyone to do. I will fully admit I did buy an actual Platino head to make the mold from because I got a good opportunity to buy one of the ones modified to be used as a keychain. So I cast that head. But otherwise, you could just use a straight-up He-Man head and paint the beard on and get the job just fine. But it's a very simple custom to build. Otherwise, you just need the right parts. So obviously, we use Jitsu armor, paint the gold parts silver. And I know a lot of people use a Fisto body. A Jitsu body is a much more accurate skin tone match for the vintage. Vintage. I guess he is vintage. He came out in the early 2000s for that figure. And then we swap out the fist with a Fisto fist. Got the all-black legs from, I believe I took him off an Undertaker figure, but there's multiple figures with all-black legs in the WWE line. And then we have Mechanex torso and boots. And then just pop the head on. You can either get the cast or just use the real He-Man head, painted it. And then I gave him He-Man's axe, which I get isn't accurate. I should give him a vintage He-Man axe. But I didn't have one on hand at the moment. But I think he's a really solid-looking custom. He came out very nice. And I really wouldn't change much with him. Theoretically, he needs a different waist piece because the actual figures don't have loincloths. They have the same belt, but they have a smooth waist. But I really didn't feel like working on the custom that much for a visual thing that most people won't pay attention to. So I just left him as is, and eventually I'd like to do the entire line as customs. And thankfully, I don't really have to cast much else. He's like the only unique head. There's a couple of things that maybe be different, but otherwise it's mostly just grabbing Origins parts and repainting them. I've yet to get to it. Then up next, we have Thundar. And he's been, a lot of people wanted him. And when I eventually figured everything out, I was very happy if I came together. The big sticking point with him for a while was his boots, because he has those thick, very furry boots. And while it's not accurate, I used Ultimate Warrior boots, and they frankly do the visual very well. Otherwise, he's mostly based on a Ric Flair with with a He-Man loincloth. All things considered, you probably should have the Cartoon Collection loincloth instead, but I've yet to grab one to swap it out. And I mean, theoretically, I could use Cartoon Collection lower arms and paint them instead of just painting the bracer and Ric Flair arms. But they look fine, so I'll probably leave them as is for now. Initially, I wanted to have the sword be translucent, but I could not get it to be structurally sound cast in a translucent resin, so I ended up going with glow-in-the-dark. I changed up the glow-in-the-dark mixture from what I had for the glow-in-the-dark Star Swords, so it was a more vibrant color to kind of get that look. And I think it does the visual pretty well. I think he's a pretty decently put together custom, and I would like to have some of his friends soon, but the problem with that is I need to cast ankle pieces for them. Boot pieces, and I am not pleased with that. I don't like doing that. So I've been kind of dragging my feet getting to that, but eventually he won't be alone. And then the last in this series, a very recent request, we have the mighty Mitor, who was a very interesting challenge to make work. As you can see, a lot of the paintwork on him is still a mess, and his medallion's hanging bizarrely because it's the only one I have at the moment. It's tied, so it needs some work done. And you can see there is some stray, used hot glue to put the horns in, and this one needs cleaned up because this was the display one, and once again, this was put together at about 1 a.m., and it wasn't the one anyone was getting. So this, the pelt part sits sort of weird on, I guess you'd refer to that as a helmet. And I wanted to use fabric for it because the thing is, there was no way to make it wide enough and look good visually as a cast resin piece that wouldn't horribly hinder posing. It might not be the best plan, but I thought it was probably better in the grand scheme of things than just make a big chunk to stand a figure because it'd weigh so much he'd fall over. I'm not opposed to messing around with it more in the future, but as of now, I think it's pretty okay. I'm very pleased with this club I sculpted, how that came out. And he once again just built in a Ric Flair body with parts I grabbed off some He-Man I had in the parts bin. The boots aren't accurate, and neither is technically the loincloth, but I didn't think it was unique enough to justify having a unique overlay. Unlike Black Star, who had such a unique belt buckle, he just sort of has like a hanging one instead, so I just sort of left it as is. He needs some work, but I think he's pretty good for what he is right now. He'll get some work done before the rest of the year, so he'll hopefully look better in the future. These first of these next ones also appeared at PowerCon for the first time, and they ended up being so popular, so many people talked about them, I ended up making it a full series, and that's Muscle. So initially the plan was to just do a couple, because I thought, well, it's a fun thing to bring up. Mattel released the line in the US, so there's some connective tissue there. So I started with Muscle Man or Kaneka Man, and it's a very simple build. He has the Shawn Michael boots, and the rest is just a Ric Flair figure. At that point, Ric Flair was harder to get. Now you can get him for $4, so very easy custom make at this point. And on that front, I decided, well, I was going to do that version, do the card back version of him from the Muscle cards. Similar build, once again, a lot of Sunman parts. He has the Sunman gauntlets with the diamonds sanded down. And at that time, oddly, getting a red waist piece was actually kind of difficult, so I believe I repainted an Ultimate Warrior waist for him. But the painting a whole body pink was a challenge. As you can see, it's not that great, and there's actually paint damage there I need to fix. Really needs a lot of work because pink is not a fun color to work with, but it was neat to be able to do both versions of him so early on. And the reason I did that is because when I did that version, as you can see, I sculpted the armor for Robin Mask. The reason why this happened is I realized you could use Keldor's boots to get the same visual for Robin Mask's boots. So I just went with it. And otherwise, he's once again built on a lot of Sunman parts. He's a mishmash of different pieces. So he has Skeletor parts, then he has Sunman parts, and I had to paint the weird little knee pads on him. And he's one you can see where I did spray him, and the spray got weirdly, tacky, and I need to clean off his upper legs and just brush sealant on those knees. But he holds up pretty well. His head could maybe stand to be a tad bigger, but it worked pretty well. And I also did eventually get around to making a set of his armor in silver to make the alternate color version of him, but I've yet to actually get around to making it, so I just have it ready to go. I'll get to that eventually. And then the last of the initial show figures was Terry Man, who I'm still pretty pleased about, because freehanding those stars on everything was not a pleasant thing to do. But he was built on a Space Sumo body, because I once again needed glove toppers, and I wanted him to be paler, and he's actually one of the palest figures in the line. At the time, I had to fully paint these boots. I used them from the Ric Flair, since Kinnikuman didn't use them. And then about next wave, Earthquake came out with these exact boots, and just wasted my time. But I'm pretty pleased with the figure. The waist is from that the Roddy Piper Masters of WWE Universe figure again. But I think this was a good starting set, and it got a lot of people very interested at the show. Just like, oh, are you doing this one? Are you doing this one? So I decided to continue. So I only had one figure more, because I believe this show was a week after PowerCon, so I didn't have very long to work. But I did manage to premiere Kinnikuman Great, who was a full figure repaint, because there was nothing to match any of the colors on this guy, and it was a challenge. But I got to reuse the same head sculpt I did for Kinnikuman. And then I got to use the Bray Wyatt lower legs, the pant legs, which I believe they've only released on 2 different figures now. And unfortunately, while there's no boot swivel, it's an incredibly useful sculpt, and I wish it was a bit easier to get. That's always the annoying thing with some of these figures, getting their correct leg sculpts for them. But I think it came out okay. I had to freehand this tank top and everything, and it was something. But he was good enough to do, so that was the only premiere at the next show. But the show after that, I made sure I tried to come out in force. So, we'll start with, I will fully admit he doesn't stand very well, because I did not check the boot bottoms and boot tops combination I was putting together, so he stands a bit funky. I made Warsman. Once again, I think his head came out a bit small, but it is what it is. And the bear claws, I have just super glued to the back of closed hands, which I once again think I took from Ultimate Warrior. And these ones are a bit not great looking, because I only got so many, and I wanted to use the worst ones for my display one. And I used, once again, the Keldor boots to sort of get the visual of the boots getting up to the knee pads. They're not great, but they do the job okay. And then I used the feet from a Shawn Michaels, which actually don't work very well with these boot tops. I didn't realize until I went to stand him after I'd built him, and he kind of stands a little bit funky. But I think he came out okay. I'll probably eventually get around doing one in the alternate color scheme. Once again, got to work on some stuff on his butt there, because that's just where a lot of rub happens, only things in transport. But he's pretty fun, and he was really needed for the display. So I got him. And at the same time, I also did premiere Brocken Jr., who I believe was built on the Palace Guard Infiltrator figure, which actually, when I took the legs off that waist piece, one of the hip joints snapped, which I'd never seen happen before. And I just repainted a Ric Flair waist, and he has the Shawn Michael boots, but then I swapped him with the boots for that one, so he has the Keldor boots, just to kind of give that right boot look. I sanded down the bracers to do this thing. I'm not even sure what that'd be, but it's on the design of the GameCube game. But I think he's pretty good. He has a unique cast torso, which can be somewhat frustrating, because some of the pulls, the one arm doesn't want to stand as well, but I got it working. And then he has the waist overlay, which completes the uniform look, and I think he came out pretty good. And then up next we have Wolfman, or Rikishi Man. And I generally just refer to him as Rikishi Man, because if you don't know what's going on, why is this guy Wolfman? At the time, this is what I had. He probably should have the wider torso piece that certain figures like The Rock or Goldberg use, but I've yet to swap him over to that. And he has custom-made ankles and feet. And this is why I don't like casting ankles, because they tend to be a little more loose, and that's not great for when you have a figure on display. Unfortunately, John Cena is not that easy to get, and they've yet to reissue those bare ankles again. But he has just head sculpt and the feet and the belt piece, which I just cut some strings and glued them in to be the hanging parts from the sumo belt. I don't know what those are called. I'm not very good at research. And his feet want to fall out because he's not standing very well at the moment, so I'm just laying him down. That's the problem with, once again, the cast ankles. The feet don't want to stand that great. And he's knocking Warsman over. Oh, no. That show, also a good example of why cast ankles is a bad idea, is Ramen Man. And he doesn't want to stand up at all right now, so I really need to work on these without a stand. Thankfully, it shows I get to put them in stands, so they don't fall over and people can see them easily. And also, it's not like I'm selling the ankles, so I don't worry about if people think, oh, those ankles are low quality. It doesn't matter. It's just the head. Theoretically, he should probably be on a cartoon collection body because it'd be a thinner look. And realistically, at the time, that was my plan, but the cartoon collection had just started shipping and I couldn't find one. So he still is on a normal Ric Flair body, and then I painted the legs red. That's about it. He has feet. I swiped off a Stratos to get those flat foot look. Otherwise, the head and the braid are two separate pieces, and I think it comes out pretty well, and it creates a nice ball joint. So that is the last of that show's premieres. Then the next show in the next year, I brought 3 more in. I have Geronimo, and this is what I was talking about with the Mitor piece. His hair is so big, you really can't pose his head, and it wants to pull him forward or backwards, depending on how I'm standing him. But otherwise, he's a pain to stand at times, unfortunately. But he has the ankle and wrist cuffs, the furry cuffs, whatever those would be, and the head sculpt. And then he's actually just built on the standard Hulk Hogan that came out in the Superstars line. The colors actually work perfectly out of the box. And then he has Stratos feet I repainted just to get the once again the smooth featureless foot. But it's pretty. I'm pretty happy with the results here. Along with him, I had Buffalo Man, who I will admit the knee spikes don't look great because, once again, since I have to transport these things, I need them that they can't break in transit, so I just hot glue them on so I can easily fix them when I get to a show. I think the head came out a tiny bit small, but I'm pretty pleased with the overall look. I was debating for a long time if he should be on the Andre body or the normal body, and the thing that really pushed me to it was Snoutspout's hands are perfect for him. They have the ribbing on them already. It was perfect. Otherwise, he's built on a Superstars rock body. With one exception, he has Cartoon Collection Beastman ankle pieces. I really wanted to give them full Cartoon Collection lower legs because that's where the height comes from in that line. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't realize the knee pins are actually different between Standard Origins figures and Cartoon Collection figures for some reason, so you can't swap them over. Eventually, he will have full Cartoon Collection legs, which will give him extra height, but the rock body gives him more of a width, which is very nice to have on hand, and it matches the skin tone Buffalo Man has in some of the appearances. I do eventually want to get around to doing a Terry Bowl to match my Muscle Man, but I need to get the shoulder armor sculpted and make that mold work. I'll figure that out eventually. That's a future thing to do. But I think he's pretty good. Oh, I knocked one of his horns out. Yeah, the horns, once again, are not glued in place. They are just to be plugged in place for transport, and actually a small amount of blue tack in there just to hold them in. Obviously, for anyone else who would want them, you just glue them in when you get them, and don't have to worry about it. But since I don't want to knock him apart when transport, he is what he is right now. And then the other tall one was Neptune Man. Once again, I'd like to do the other color eventually, and he has the same problems as Buffalo Man, that he was meant to have Cartoon Collection lower legs, but that ended up not coming to pass, so he's just a bit taller than he should be, but he should be much taller. But otherwise, I believe he was built on an Ultimate Warrior base, I think, was who I went with in the end, because he has the fists. I could be wrong, I could be mistaken, but I think that's who I went with. And then once again, he has the Stratos feet because I have a large supply of those. Eventually, I'll probably do the red vest version, but for right now, I'm happy enough with the green vest version. I'll probably do Big the Budo someday, built on an Andre body. I've just yet to get around to putting it all together. But that's the entirety of this series. I have a couple more planned. I really don't know how in depth I want to go, but I have a couple more ready to go. I've just yet to actually build the full figures or get a couple pieces working. But they'll be around in the next year. They'll be future shows. Off we have the, unaffiliated characters. I guess this one, you could theoretically consider a Master Universe character. I've made Superman, and he's built on a Mechanic body with, once again, a Ric Flair waist piece, and then I took the Cartoon Collection Stratos boots. And I was initially planning on a lighter blue body, but not Skeletor light blue, so I was sort of figuring out what to do, and then everything just fell together here, so I just went with the Mechanic body in the end. And unfortunately, I was spending... For some reason, the legs are loose, and I'm not sure why, because they are just Mechanic legs put in a different waist piece. I have no idea why they ended up loose. It just sometimes happens with customs. It's something I can work on if you have to get to. I spent a long time struggling how to figure out how to attach his cape, and eventually I just gave up and glued it in place because there's no good way to attach his cape. It just is what it is, and I also made the his S symbol a raised piece just for ease of use to paint and glue on. Painting on would have looked nicer, but it would have been a bigger pain to do. He doesn't have a S shield on the back. Oop, I pulled his head off. But I don't really mind because even though he should be lighter and he should have an S shield on the back for time accuracy, I'm very influenced by the animated series from the 90s, so this is about what I go to when I see him. other than the obviously gauntlets on the forearms I get to replace, but that will happen eventually. And up next, also someone who shouldn't have gauntlets, but I once again haven't gotten to it, I did Big Jim. Because he's very influential in the creation of Master Universe, I felt they should have something, and I just like Big Jim figures anyways. So it's a head cast of Big Jim I shrunk, and I think it came out pretty well. I really didn't know what to do outfit-wise. I was really debating if I want to make him in his pack outfit, which I'll probably do an alternate someday. And theoretically, in this outfit, he should be barefoot, but so many Big Jims had boots, I didn't mind the look of this. They're just Ric Flair boots painted with the Ric Flair waist pieces on a He-Man body. Because Big Jim actually has a deeper tan than He-Man, which doesn't seem right until you look at it, but he does. So I went with this build, and I think it works pretty well. And then the last of them has almost no reason for existing in this line. The classic character, Gordon Freeman. The whole reason I have a Gordon Freeman is I had extra Horde Trooper limbs, and I wanted to use them. And I realized the kind of ribbed piping look actually matches the Half-Life 1 Hev suit. So I just did it. He really should have a Roboto or Manny Faces waist. I didn't have any extras at the time, so I just painted an extra WWE waist. Eventually, I will swap that out. I sculpted the torso, the head, and the crowbar. And otherwise, he's mostly just built on Horde Trooper pieces with, he has a hand with a Roboto lower legs and hand, which I think I took off one of the Kane figures, and this is a normal black hand over there because I don't have the equivalent for that one right now. Eventually I'll get an extra Manny Faces and grab these parts. But I'm pretty pleased with how it came out, as odd of a choice as he was for me to make. He comes together pretty well. He needs a bit more work. Obviously the waist will get replaced, and I really should probably sand down the top of the hips a bit just to get some more clearance in there, because orange paint is atrocious to work with. It's worse than red or yellow, who'd have thought? But I think it's a pretty fun custom to have for no reason. There is no reason to have a Masters of the Universe based Gordon Freeman, but I do, so I'm happy about that. So that's all of my current traveling customs, I believe. I'll have more in the future. I'll get these guys cleaned up. Thanks for watching.